The snow came down in fat, heavy flakes that morning, the kind that bury tracks before a man can even turn back to see 'em. I stood on my uncle's porch, boots sinking into the boards, hands stiff at my sides. 18 years old, and already I felt older than I ought to. My uncle, Ezra May, kept his hat low like he didn't much want to look at me while he struck his bargain. He talked to me the way ranchers talk of stock: clear teeth, strong back, no bad habits. Across from him stood Clayton Ward. He was tall, shoulders broad as the barn door, a man weathered by Wyoming wind and silence. His wife had died near 2 winters back, leaving him with 3 children and more work than he could manage. Folks said he needed a woman in the house, someone to mind the young'uns and cook his meals, though no one asked if I needed anything at all. I didn't look at him long, my eyes fixed instead on the frost clinging to the windowpane, as if maybe it would swallow me whole. I listened as Ezra named his price, $50 and a bull, and I listened to the grunt of agreement when Ward reached into his coat. There was the rasp of paper bills, the promise of livestock, and just like that, I was less a niece, more a transaction. Ezra didn't hug me goodbye. He pressed my satchel into my hands, tied shut with twine, and muttered something about me being better off. My chest ached, but my face stayed still. I'd learned early there wasn't much use in tears where Ezra was concerned. He had debts and a temper, both of which weighed more than blood. Clayton didn't offer his hand. He just nodded toward the wagon where his children sat bundled, 3 pairs of eyes peering at me like I was a stranger come to steal something from 'em. I climbed up without a word, skirts dragging through the slush, and settled beside them. They didn't shift to make room. As the wagon lurched forward, the house I'd scrubbed and cooked in since girlhood shrank behind me. Ezra's figure blurred in the snow, and then he was gone. The road stretched ahead, wide and endless, and I thought of how little choice I had in its direction. Clayton drove without speaking. The horse's breath plumed in the cold, and the creak of the wagon wheels filled the silence between us. I could feel the weight of his presence beside me, stern and unyielding, a man built for work and not for words. The wind bit at my cheeks, but I held my chin high. If he'd bought me, he wouldn't see me weep for it. Inside, my stomach turned with shame and fear. Yet beneath it all, something else smoldered, a stubborn ember I'd carried my whole life. I would not be just a piece of property, not forever. So I folded my hands in my lap, steadying them against the cold, and stared straight ahead into the storm. The bargain had been struck. My life, for better or for worse, now rode with Clayton Ward. And though I had no say in how it began, I swore to myself I'd carve out some part of what came next. The Ward Ranch showed itself as little more than a dark shape against the snow, a cluster of log walls half buried in drifts. Smoke curled thin from the chimney, yet no warmth reached me as Clayton helped his children down from the wagon. He didn't offer me a hand, not even a glance, just strode ahead with the reins, leaving me to trail behind like a hired girl. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and something stale, like ashes left too long in the hearth. The walls were bare, save for a single photograph nailed crooked over the mantel, A woman's face, delicate and pale. Clara Ward, I reckoned, the late mistress of this place. Her eyes seemed to follow me, measuring me against a memory I could never reach. The children scattered wordlessly. The eldest, Micah, was maybe 12, thin and sharp-eyed, every movement guarded. He looked at me like I was a trespasser. The middle boy, Samuel, clung to his brother's sleeve but stared with open suspicion. Rosie, the youngest, vanished behind a chair, wide eyes peeking over the edge before darting away. Not one of them spoke. Clayton removed his coat, set it on a peg, and without a word disappeared into the back room. That was the end of my welcome. Left alone, I unpacked my satchel and stared at the meager contents. 2 dresses, a Bible, and a handkerchief stitched by my late mother. Nothing in me felt like a wife, less still a mother. Yet here I was, expected to fill both roles before sundown. I set to work, because work was all I knew. The stove smoked when I lit it, coughing soot into the room. My bread turned dense, more stone than loaf. When I tried to mend a shirt, the needle pricked my finger and stained the cloth. Each failure pressed heavier on me, like the house itself was testing my worth and finding me wanting. At supper, Clayton ate in silence, eyes on his plate. The children mirrored him. No questions, no kindness, just the scrape of spoons against tin bowls. I forced bites down my throat, though I could hardly taste them. I longed for a word, any word that might bridge the gap between us. None came. Later, in the narrow bed he had set aside for me, I stared at the rafters, the cold pressing in from every crack in the logs. I listened to the hushed voices of the children through thin walls, whispering about me as though I couldn't hear. "Why's she here?" Samuel asked. Micah's reply was hard, bitter. "Paul bought her." The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing. I'd promised myself I would not cry, and I meant to keep it. Still, my chest ached with the weight of their truth. Morning brought chores piled higher than snowbanks, wood to split, water to haul, stock to tend. My hands blistered, my back burned, yet no one offered a word of thanks. Each day I rose again, telling myself I'd endure until I found a way to belong. I wasn't sure how long a soul could live in silence, but I meant to learn. Persistence was all I had to hold me upright in that cold, unwelcoming house. The days passed slow as tar. Each one waited with chores and silence. Yet somewhere in the grind of work and lonesome evenings, I began to notice the smallest cracks in the ice that kept us apart. It started with the water buckets. I'd left them half filled, too weary to haul the last load. Next morning, I found them brimming full, neat as you please. Clayton never spoke of it, but I knew it wasn't the children. They were still wary of me, especially Micah. Another time, when I burned the porridge, a covered pot waited on the stove before breakfast, oats cooked right. No note, no word, but someone was watching, softening just enough to keep me going. I decided if kindness was to be done in silence, I would answer in kind. One evening, I baked honey bread with the last jar I'd brought from Ezra's cellar. It came out lopsided and darker than it ought, but the sweet smell filled the cabin. I cut slices and set 'em at each child's place. Samuel sniffed suspiciously before nibbling. Rosie took hers in both hands, sticky-faced and wide-eyed. Only Micah refused, arms folded tight across his chest. Instead of pressing him, I left a small slice wrapped in cloth by his bedside. Next morning, the cloth was empty. He didn't thank me, but he didn't throw it away either. I searched for other ways to reach him. I started gathering pine cones by the riverbank, polishing them with a rag and leaving one at Rose's pillow. She'd blush, then leave a small pebble or feather on mine in return. Samuel liked whittling. I slipped him spare wood scraps when I could, pretending it was nothing. Micah was harder. His eyes carried all the weight of a boy who'd seen too much too soon. He kept his distance, guarding his brother and sister like a soldier standing watch. One Sunday afternoon, I walked alone to the far hill where a single oak tree stood. At its roots lay a wooden cross, weathered and nearly swallowed by weeds. Clara Ward's grave. The earth looked forgotten, but I couldn't stand to leave it so. I cleared away the dead grass, set wild flowers in a tin cup, and whispered a prayer I half remembered from my mother. When I turned, Clayton was there, standing a few paces back. His hat was in his hands, his eyes unreadable. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod before walking away. My heart thudded with something I couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or sorrow shared in silence. That night, as the children settled, Rosie climbed into my lap without asking. Her head rested against me, light as a sparrow. Samuel leaned closer, curiosity softening his face. Micah watched from the shadows, arms still crossed, though his eyes flickered with something less hard than before. It wasn't family yet, not even close, but for the first time, I felt the faintest warmth in that cold house, as though spring might one day find its way through the snow. Winter came down hard that year, a crueler bite than I'd ever known. One night, as the wind howled through the cracks in the shutters, Rosie took sick. It began with a cough that rattled her small chest. Then the heat of fever burned through her like fire. By dawn, her breath came shallow, her face pale and damp with sweat. I'd never nursed a child before, but I didn't stop to think. I wrapped her in blankets, brewed willow bark tea, and sat with her through the long hours. Each time she stirred or whimpered, I pressed a cool cloth to her brow. The boys hovered near, but dared not come close, their fear written plain across their faces. Clayton worked the ranch by day and kept to the shadows by night. I caught him more than once standing outside the door, watching through the narrow crack of the frame. He said nothing, yet I felt his eyes on me as I rocked Rosie, singing scraps of lullabies my own mother once hummed. 3 nights I stayed at her side. My head ached from lack of sleep, hands trembling as I spooned broth she barely swallowed. More than once I feared she'd slip from me, her tiny hand limp in mine. But I held fast, whispering prayers into her hair, begging God not to take her. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Sweat soaked her curls, and she opened her eyes with a weak smile. Her voice came soft as a sigh, but the words struck deep as a rifle shot. "Thank you, Mama Laura." For a moment, I could not breathe. Tears blurred my sight, though I blinked them away quick. To hear her call me that, something in me shifted, like the earth settling after a long tremor.
I kissed her damp forehead and promised she'd never be alone again. The house seemed to change after that. Samuel watched me differently, less guarded. Even Micah, though he tried to keep his distance, couldn't hide the way his eyes softened when Rosie clung to my skirts. The silence around the supper table wasn't quite so sharp. One evening, as I carried Rosie to bed, I glimpsed Clayton in the doorway. His face was half in shadow, but there was something raw there, an ache, a wonder, maybe both. He opened his mouth as though to speak, then closed it again. All he did was tip his hat and walk out into the night. I lay awake later, listening to the wind ease against the shutters, and I felt it for the first time, a thread binding me to this place, not by bargain or duty, but by love freely given. Rosie had named me her mother. No money could buy that, no silence could erase it. And though Clayton still hid behind walls of grief, I knew a door had cracked open. What lay beyond it, I could only hope to learn.
For weeks after Rosie's recovery, the cabin felt different. The children lingered near me now. Samuel bringing me his whittled scraps for approval. Rosie insisting on braiding my hair with clumsy fingers. Even Micah, though still wary, no longer flinched when I spoke his name. A quiet belonging began to root itself in me, fragile as new grass under snow. I started to believe maybe this place could be home. A baked bread that didn't break teeth. I mended shirts with seams almost straight. The silence at supper grew lighter, as though the ghost that haunted the table had begun to ease. Sometimes, when I caught Clayton watching, I thought I saw something in his eyes that wasn't emptiness, something I dared not name. But peace can crack faster than ice on the river. One evening, after the children slept, I went to fetch more wood from the pile near the barn. The night was sharp, stars glittering like frost. As I neared the door, voices drifted from inside, Clayton's and another man's, low but clear in the still air. "You paid good money for her," the stranger said with a laugh. $50 and a bull. Figure you got yourself a bargain wife." My heart clenched, breath caught in my throat. Clayton's reply came steady, almost bored. "Convenience, that's all. Someone to tend the house, keep the children alive. Don't make it out to be more." The words hit harder than any blow. My hands went numb around the wood I carried. I wanted to storm in, to demand he take 'em back, but the weight of them pressed me still. All I had thought I was building crumbled to ash in that instant. I slipped back to the cabin unseen, blood roaring in my ears. The children slept peaceful, their small faces soft in the glow of the dying fire. I sat at the table staring at the shadows, fighting the sobs clawing at my throat. Before dawn, I wrote a letter. My hand shook as I put the words down, that I would not be a burden, that I could not live as a purchased thing, that they'd be better without me. I left it folded neat on the table. Then I wrapped my shawl tight, took nothing more than a bundle of bread, and stepped into the snow. The cold bit sharp, but I welcomed it. Each step away from that house was a step away from shame, away from a man who could look me in the face by day and at night reduce me to a convenience. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I'd rather face the wilderness alone than stay where my heart was not seen. Behind me, the ranch lay silent, windows glowing faint with firelight, ahead only snow and endless dark. I walked faster. The snow was knee-deep by the time the sky began to pale. My shawl had stiffened with frost. and each breath scraped my throat raw. I'd left before dawn, following no road, only the dim outline of the hills. The world was a silent expanse of white, and in it I felt small as a speck. My legs trembled with every step. I don't know how long I'd been walking when I heard the sound behind me. Horse beats, muffled but steady, drawing closer. My heart leapt. A rider in this weather meant danger, and for a moment I thought of wolves, of men who wouldn't care whose wife I'd been. I turned, clutching my bundle like a shield. It was Clayton. Snow clung to his hat brim and beard. His horse blew steam into the air. He swung down without a word, boots sinking deep, and came toward me. "Laura," he said, his voice rough with cold and something else. "Don't do this." I wanted to scream at him, to throw his words back in his face. Instead, my voice cracked. "I won't be bought, Clayton. Not by you, not by anyone." He stopped a few paces away, breath heavy, eyes searching mine. "Those words you heard in the barn?" He shook his head, snow scattering from his hat. "I said 'em for his sake, not for mine." I stared at him, shivering. "For his sake?" he said, voice low. "Men out here don't understand kindness. They'd mock you, mock me if I admitted what you'd done for this place. He was sniffing for gossip. If I'd told him the truth, that you'd turned my house back into a home, that my children smile again because of you, he'd 'a' run his mouth from Cheyenne to Cody." His hands were bare, red with cold. He went on. "I don't know how to talk about what I feel. I was raised on silence and hard work. But I see you, Laura. I see you nursing my child, mending what I left broken. I see you." The wind whipped between us, carrying his words like sparks. My tears froze against my cheeks. "All I wanted," I whispered, "was to matter." "You do," his answer came fierce, almost desperate. "You do more than you know." For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the horse shifting its weight, the distant cry of a crow. I lowered my bundle, my fingers aching from the cold. "Then why not say it?" I whispered. He said simply, "I'm trying. I'm trying right now." Something in his face, raw, unguarded, broke through the wall I'd built. I took a step toward him, then another, until the smell of horse and leather filled my lungs. He reached out, but didn't touch, waiting. I let the bundle fall into the snow and pressed my forehead against his chest. For the first time since the bargain, his arms came around me, not as a claim, but as a shelter. The storm hissed around us, but inside that circle of warmth, I felt my pulse steady. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, for the first time, I believed him.
Peace in a house like ours never lasted long. Spring thaw came sudden, flooding the creek and loosening the earth. The boys took to helping their father mend fences and drive the cattle to higher ground. It was Micah, proud and stubborn, who climbed a ridge first when a steer broke loose. Samuel followed at his heels, despite my warning to stay back. I watched from below, heart tight, as the steer twisted wild against the slope. Micah lunged to grab its rope. In that instant, the beast bucked, horns catching the air. Samuel slipped, his boot skidding on wet rock. Micah shoved him clear, but the ground gave way beneath them both. The world slowed. I saw Samuel tumble into the mud, bruised but safe, while Micah's body slammed hard against the rocks.
His cry cut short, then silence. By the time Clayton reached him, I was already there, my skirts torn, knees bloodied from the scramble. Micah lay limp, his eyes closed, breath shallow. A gash split his temple. My hand shook as I pressed cloth to the wound, whispering his name again and again. We carried him inside, laid him in his bed. Days blurred into nights as he lay motionless, his skin pale as wax. Rosie clung to my skirts, guilt etched into her small face. Rosie cried herself to sleep against my shoulder. Clayton withdrew into himself, pacing the barn, blaming his own recklessness for letting the boys climb the ridge. When he came inside, his eyes were red, but he spoke no words. He couldn't look at Micah without flinching. I would not leave that bedside. I fed the boy broth drop by drop, cooled his fever with claws, prayed until my knees ached on the wooden floor. Sometimes I whispered stories from my childhood, nonsense tales about catching fireflies in jars, just so the room would not drown in silence. On the third night, with exhaustion pressing heavy, I gripped Micah's hand tight. "You're not allowed to give up on us," I told him. My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "Not now. Not after all we've come through. You're my son, Micah, mine, and I won't let you go." For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then, faint as a breath, his fingers twitched against mine. His lips moved, the word rasping dry. "Mama." A sob broke loose from my chest. Clayton, standing in the doorway, bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Rosie and Samuel rushed forward, climbing onto the bed, clinging to their brother as tears wet all our cheeks. Micah lived. He called me Mama, and I knew the wall that had stood hardest between us had finally cracked. That night, when the house had quieted, Clayton touched my shoulder gently. His eyes were soft, but heavy with something like awe. "You've given me back more than I ever thought I'd have again," he said. And for the first time, I believed him without doubt.
Summer came with fields of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. For the first time since I'd set foot on that porch, the Ward Ranch felt like a place alive with color. Clayton asked me to walk with him one morning, his voice quiet but certain. He led me to the meadow where an oak tree stood, Clara's resting place. At its roots, he'd cleared the earth, planting a circle of daisies that now bloomed bright against the grass. There, beneath the open sky, he took my hands. His palms were rough, scarred by years of labor, yet his grip was gentle. From his pocket, he drew a small box, carved simple, the wood worn smooth. Inside lay a string of pearls. "Clara's," he said, his voice thick. "She wore them the day I married her. They belong to you now, if you'll take them." Tears blurred my sight, but my voice held steady. "I will." We wed proper in that meadow, just the children for witness, the wind carrying our vows into the hills. When Clayton slipped the pearls round my neck, I felt not the weight of another woman's memory, but the trust of a man offering me his future. As we stood together, a figure appeared at the edge of the field. My breath caught. It was Uncle Ezra, hat in hand, shoulders stooped. He looked smaller than I remembered, worn thin by debts and years of drinking. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, they weren't hard, but hollow. "I came to say I was wrong," he muttered.
I can't undo what I did. I sold you like you were cattle. God help me, I'd take it back if I could." The children drew close, Rosie clutching my skirt. Samuel held Micah's arm as he still mended, and Clayton stood beside me, no longer silent, but steady. From a bargain in the snow to a vow in wildflowers, we had crossed the gulf between survival and love. I was no longer property, no longer voiceless. I was wife. I was mother. I was home.